Humanist or secularist with a Facebook account is likely to have heard of Megan Manson. She's head of the policy and research at the National Secular Society and a tireless Facebook poster, giving regular updates on a whole range of Facebook sites. And because of that, I suspect has become the best known among NSS members after Keith Porteous-Wood himself. Now, welcome, Megan, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. There's a series of questions I'd like to ask you, and I think lots of humanists would be very interested in finding out about a little bit more about you. But first of all, about the secular issues itself, we know that there are many folk around the UK who are not religious, Megan, more than half the country, we're told now. But few of us become active like yourself. So my first question for you is, what actually led you to get involved with and work for the Secular Society? What's the Megan Manson story?
I suppose I come from a slightly different angle here, because I don't come from the non-religious perspective at all. I was originally involved with interfaith. I still am involved in my local interfaith group, and that is what this all began with. So sort of being in an interfaith group, I was there initially sort of to have a seat at the table for the particular group I was representing, and wanting to make sure that the same rights and the same things that other religious groups are getting, we could get to. And I wanted, to have the same acknowledgement and the same level of respect. And going to these interfaith meetings got me thinking about the fact, partly the fact that we all disagree on different issues. So it's like, okay, we do disagree on quite a bit, as you'd expect for lots of different religious groups. How can we come together and be cohesive? What unites us? And it also got me thinking about what equality really is, and thinking, well, actually, do I just want a seat at the table here, or do I want to see everyone, including the non-religious, enjoy the same rights, the same respect? And that's, I didn't really know what exactly it was that I wanted here, but I had this idea that, there's a real key here to equality between people of all religions and none. And then I discovered the National Secular Society, and that gave me the vocab that I needed to sort of articulate what I was thinking. Is, oh, it's secularism. This is what this is about. This is what I want. So that's really what triggered it. I also, this got me thinking as well about my own experience as being raised as Roman Catholic, sort of looking at the things like faith schools, and sort of causing me to kind of re-examine that and think, well, there's something wrong with the picture there in terms of state-funded Catholic schools. I also spent quite a bit of time in Japan as well, which is quite a secularist nation. They have constitutional separation of religion and state.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so, and that I think also sort of influenced my thinking of, Japan does it really well, why can't we?
So, that's an important point that you make there, because one important difference between humanism and secularism is that you can be a secularist and still be religious.
Yes.
And there can be many people in the Secular Society, I'm sure, who are people of faith.
Yeah, there are. There are people of faith in our staff, on our council and our membership. And it originally, sort of until fairly recently, it was the NSS was an atheist organisation. Quite, it was quite strict on that point, but it's more recently it has decided to move away from that. So I do hope we do see more people from religious backgrounds, more religious people, as well as more non-religious people joining.
There's a similarity there with Humanistically Speaking, because although we are a humanist magazine, we'll always be a humanist magazine. We are there for everyone, and we are interested in developing dialogue with people, of course with the NSS, but also with people of faith, and whatever faith they are, so long as they're decent, they have decent approaches to life and tolerance, then they're welcome as our readers and to participate. But why do you think so many people seem to be turning away from religion?
Well, I think about the sort of three of the traditional purposes that religion has. One is to provide explanations about why the world is the way it is. Another is to have a moral code, and another is to provide a sense of community. So there's three three purposes religion has. The first one, religion as a way of explaining about the world, well, that's been replaced by science, most definitely. And scientific literacy is just increases generation upon generation in the UK. I'm always amazed to see just how literate my young nephews who are at primary school are compared to how I was at that age. You know, they know way more science than I did, so I think that's going to continue. So you know, people are no longer looking to religion for explanations like as to where the universe came from, things like that. In terms of morality, as we all know, religious morals are very much in conflict a lot of the time with, you know, modern day conceptions of morality, particularly when it comes to how we treat women and gay people. So increasing numbers of people having quite negative feelings towards the moral codes that are found in religious texts. And then to compound with that, you have the issues such as religious extremism and the multitude of child abuse scandals which have happened in several religious organisations. So people are no longer looking to religion as a source of morality. And finally, on community, particularly in urban Britain, the emphasis of having to have something that the whole community does together has gone away a bit. We're living more private lives. The family is becoming more of the base unit. And where we do have community, things that we all do together, there's other things apart from church that does that. So, you know, you have sports, clubs, increasingly the internet, of course, is a big source of community for people. So although those three purposes are kind of are falling at the wayside for religion, and people are finding alternatives. So yeah, that's why I think people are moving away from religion.
I was interested in your comment about the child abuse scandals, and I suspect that's had a real influence on Ireland in particular, because we humanists are very aware that there's been enormous growth of humanism within Ireland and a rejection of the church. Have you experienced that in the NSS? Has it been a similar story?
A similar story for members? Or?
Yes, for people turning away from the religious values of Ireland and joining the NSS. Or
that's a good question. I don't personally look at a lot of our membership, so if there has been a significant increase in members from Ireland coming in, then I haven't noticed it. However, Atheist Ireland is quite strong, and they're making quite a lot of progress in their mission, it seems. I think there was a news piece that came out today that that they're meeting one of the representatives of government, I believe, aren't they?
I don't know.
Yes, sorry, it was the Lord Mayor of Dublin has invited Atheist Ireland to meet with at Mansion House, which is like a first for them. So, and there was a statement recently, I believe, by one of the archbishops saying that sort of Christianity is very much on the wane in Ireland too, that it's disappearing. So yes, certainly we're seeing a lot of interesting things happen in Ireland.
I think there is you mentioned earlier about morality. I think there's a need for morality and moral rules to follow by any society. But I think what's happening is that humanism and secularism as well is looking for ways to fill that gap, to fill this desire for some sort of moral structure to live on. But of course, people have their own moral values as well. But I think there's an increasing space for us there. I mean, with humanists, the number of members of the Humanist Association has increased dramatically in the last 15 years, out of all proportion, about 20 times the size that it was, just 15 years ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a similar sort of growth with the National Secular Society. But you describe yourself as a secularist rather than a humanist. Now, we've already established that you can be a secularist and you can have a faith, which you can't really as a humanist. It's kind of difficult. But are there any other differences between the National Secular Society and Humanist UK in terms of its objectives or the kind of organisation it is?
Well, my impression of Humanist UK is that it is broader. It promotes secularism as part of its understanding of humanism. And I think, as you touched on earlier, it's looking to sort of give an alternative to religion in terms of providing moral guidance, and some of the community aspects as well. I mean, increasingly they are putting more, it seems, of their activities into things like chaplaincy, into humanist weddings and humanist funerals. So they are really there, I think, to sort of fill that space that people may need if they are leaving religion. I think the NSS, we're quite narrow in our focus. We like to focus entirely on this issue of secularism, not as a part of humanism, but a secularism for everyone, because we think it is the best way that people of all religions and none can live together.
So what are the secular society's most critical campaign issues, would you say?
I think that separation of church and state, the disestablishment of the Church of England, is always going to be the number one. I think that a lot of the other issues hinge on that one. If we achieve disestablishment, then a lot of the other issues would sort of fall into place. I think that faith schools would suddenly look very, very shaky. So I think that one is the big one. It's the and speaking of faith schools as well, religion in education, I think, is another critical issue. The idea that you can have a state-funded institution that will basically turn away families because they belong to the wrong religion. I mean, that's completely out of step with our understanding of equality, with the Equality Act. I mean, there are specific exceptions in the Equality Act that enable this to happen, but it really does fly in the face of all the other developments that we've made to make Britain a more inclusive and equal place.
I agree with you 100%. I think there's got to be that separation, and it's not our place. It's not the government's place to shove religious faith onto young children. That's our point of view. But you talk about the separation of church and state, and that sounds quite simple, straightforward. I mean, you can take out the House of Lords, and you can do things to the BBC and do various things, but it does have a potentially Republican element as well, doesn't it? Because the Queen is the defender of the faith. In fact, if you're Prince Charles, you want to be defender of all faiths, which strikes me as interesting. But it's not going to be a straightforward process, is it? The separation of church and state.
No, we're talking about a fundamental issue of constitution. So no, it's not very straightforward at all. But there's various ways you could achieve it. You could technically still have a royal family and separate church and state, for example, by saying that the royal family are symbolic and that they are head of the church but not head of the state. This is similar to what happened with the position of the Japanese imperial family. They have a far more symbolic role, and they play far less of a role in sort of constitutional matters. So, and although they do have quite a big role in the spiritual side of Japanese society, so something like that could potentially work in the UK. But there's lots of different options. As you said, lots of people who support disestablishment also support, a republic. So.
Right, so what you're saying, you're reassuring the royal family that we wouldn't necessarily get rid of the royal family, which I might satisfy a few politicians and people in the House of Lords anyway. I'm interested in this relationship between the National Secular Society and Humanist UK. Are you aware of any examples that the NSS and Humanist UK working together, working in collaboration? I mean, there are enormous overlaps, aren't there, in our interests?
There are. I mean, the way I view Humanists UK, I view them as allies that are, in a way, analogous to a religious group, because they, as I said, they are sort of coming up with lots of alternatives to religion. And there are other religious groups who are sort of allied with us as well. So there's one or two. But they have their own mission, their own objectives. And I think we work better working parallel with each other and approaching these issues from different perspectives. I think that's much stronger than coming together, because it's basically giving more than one argument for secularism. So you've got the humanists saying, well, secularism is part of of our humanist beliefs, and it also helps to give humanists more rights and equality, and we're approaching it from, well, we think secularism is better for everyone. So, you know, the fact that there's two different sides, I think, is stronger.
There must surely be some regular communication, though, between Andrew Copson and Keith Porteous-Wood, isn't there?
I'm not really sure how much communication they have.
Perhaps we should ask him that question and see. One question I would ask you, though, I mean, we've been talking about the differences between the Secular Society and Humanists UK. They're clearly different organisations. But many humanists, as you almost certainly know, are also members of the Secular Society. And but what would you say to those of us who are not members, to persuade them to join the NSS? What would be in it for them? Why would they join the National Secular Society?
Well, we do look at secularism from a different perspective. So, you know, you don't have to be a humanist to have this idea. I think it's a broader idea of secularism, in my view. And we do campaign slightly differently and on slightly different things. So, for example, with our campaigns to reform marriage law, the humanists are looking more at getting humanist marriages included within the existing structure. It seems that's more their focus. They basically
because they have celebrants who want
yes, they've got celebrants. I think they're saying, look, Jews and Quakers have their own marriage laws. You know, we want the same, and I think they're taking the pragmatic view that more fundamental reform is going to take time to do, and they'd like to do this more quickly. Which, you know, they're humanists and they want to, you know, uphold their rights as humanists. So fair enough to them. But we want to look at it more fundamentally, and we want to make marriage laws fairer and more equal for everyone. That's humanists, non-religious people, religious people, everyone. We think that the marriage laws as they stand are a mess. There's about 5 different sets of laws depending on what religion you're from or what belief you're from. And so the whole thing creates an awful lot of unfairness as well, with Jews and Quakers having the ability to marry wherever they want, including outdoors, and no one else being able to do that. That's one example of how it's unfair. So we would like to see the whole thing basically be put onto a level playing field, so the same laws govern everyone.
It is a complete mess. You're probably aware that in Scotland and Northern Ireland, they do have humanist weddings. And in fact, I was discussing this with Fraser Sutherland, who's the chief executive of the Humanist Society of Scotland a few weeks ago. And he told me that not only can they marry in Scotland, but people from the south, people from Kent or Sussex, can actually go to Scotland and get married. So long as they're in Scotland, it's okay. But if they're in Newcastle, which is just a few miles away, it's not. You can't do it. And you're absolutely right, it is a complete mess. And the government really must get to grips with that, to allow people that freedom.
Unfortunately, the Law Commission has come up with a really good package of proposals, many of which are things that we basically said to the Law Commission when they were consulting, look, this is the way we think the reform should go, and what they've actually come up with is very similar to what we've asked for, which is really encouraging. But yes, once it gets to Parliament, that's when, you know, the real test comes, and to see how much of that gets accepted.
Well, what I find frustrating is that we seem to be winning all the battles, but we don't seem to be anywhere near winning the war. But hopefully, there is going to be a report, isn't there? It's going to be a commission review at the end of this year, and hopefully that will allow the legislation of humanist weddings. This is not your department particularly, I know, but it feels so very unfair and discriminatory of the government to behave when they're making all kinds of allowances for other people and not for us. There's one question I'd like to ask you personally, and you may have already answered this. You mentioned the separation of church and state being the biggie for National Secular Society, but are there any other issues that you personally feel very, very strongly about and very animated about?
Well, it's easy to get passionate about the ones that you are particularly involved with. I've been involved a lot with the weddings one, and it was one of the issues actually that I was aware of and was interested in before joining the NSS. So it's one that I personally quite am passionate about. Another one is charity law, which I feel passionately about because it's one of these ones that is considered a bit niche, a bit obscure. It's the idea that the advancement of religion is in and of itself a recognised charitable purpose in law. So provided your organisation looks like a religion that the Charity Commission considers to be a religion, and it is doing things like publishing leaflets or holding worship activities, it can be a charity on the basis of that. There's supposed to be a requirement to demonstrate a public benefit, but to be honest, we've seen very little evidence that this is really applied to religious organisations. So there's an awful lot of charities out there which seem to do nothing apart from promote their own religion, and we don't see how that is providing a public benefit that is worthy of the tax exemptions that charities get. And on top of that, some of these charities can be downright harmful to society. Some of them are promoting quite hateful ideas about gay people and women, and others sort of relate very much to some of our other campaign areas as well, where we've identified where religion can be harmful. So that's one that I feel quite passionate about, because it's one of these issues that a lot of people don't really know about, but once they do learn about it, go, oh my goodness, I had no idea that happens, that a religion can basically have charitable status just for being a religion and not really doing things like, running food banks, for example, which most people would think is a good thing to do and is beneficial.
I find that quite extraordinary, and thank you very much for sharing that with me. And of course, it occurred to me that there must be a grey area between what's a religion and what isn't a religion. Whether it's a good or bad religion is another issue. But I mean, you could almost describe humanism as religion, as you hinted on that yourself. And if we did that, presumably we would qualify automatically anyway, although we are listed as a charity.
You're absolutely right. This is one of the big issues with this, is it means that the Charity Commission suddenly has to wrestle with this really difficult question of what is a religion. And I don't think the Charity Commission are best equipped to handle that question, or if anyone is. So yeah, there have been cases of religious organisations that consider themselves to be religions being rejected from the Charity Commission because in their opinion, they weren't. So yeah.
What's the National Secular Society's condition? What kind of organisation does it describe itself as? I've been looking it up on your record, and you show yourself as a limited company.
That's right. So we are a not-for-profit limited company. We're not a charity, and that's because we are a political organisation. Charities can campaign politically, but the charity law is quite specific that you cannot be set up for a political purpose. And we think secularism is a political purpose. The disestablishment of the church is a political purpose. And we're worried that if we were to become a charity, we'd be hamstrung by this rule that you cannot exist for a political purpose. And that could affect our ability to campaign freely.
I see. So in theory, then, the NSS could associate itself with a political party. Is that possible?
Yes, we could, although I don't see why we would want to do that, because that would be a very divisive thing to do for our members, because our members come from all kinds of political backgrounds. So I can't really see us doing that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Let's go back a little bit into the history of the NSS. You've got Charles Bradlaugh. He's your hero, and in fact, I'm very aware. You've made us all very aware that there's a request for support to redress his headstone and make it more publicly appealing and tidy it up. How's that going, by the way? Is it going okay?
Yes. So just to give a little bit of background to this, you're right. So there was a monument that was erected over Bradlaugh's grave in 1893. Which incorporated a bronze bust of Bradlaugh. And this has suffered repeatedly from vandalism, and the bust was stolen as well and wasn't replaced. So, the grave is not in a good state. So we, lots of people have been saying to us, this really, this is not a good tribute to the founder of the NSS and one of the greatest radicals and secularists and progressives ever to have lived. So we've been working together with Brookwood Cemetery, which is where the grave is, and we've commissioned a new replica bust and other repairs as well to the grave. And we've also commissioned an information panel to basically tell visitors about Charles Bradlaugh. The costs are about £12,000, and fortunately, through our appeal, we have made most of that now. Our appeal is still open, so it's still not quite there yet, but most of it has been made. So really happy about that. If people do want to make donations, they can do so via our website. Okay,
so all they've got to do is call up the NSS website, and they'll follow the links, and they'll be able to generate some money. And I hope very much that that you're successful. Where exactly is the Brookwood Cemetery, by the way?
Is it? So I think it's in Woking, if I remember correctly. I'm just going to have a little check.
Okay.
Sorry, yes. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we've got a humanist group there, so no doubt they'll be paying visits. So,
excellent. Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think there are a lot of humanists who are very, very sympathetic to that. Charles Bradlaugh is a hero of both sides.
Definitely.
And in fact, he had a background which was, he was not a middle class individual. He was a poor guy, came from a poor background, who really made it, and it's an enormous tribute to him. How many times do you? This may be an unfair question, but how many times was he elected and then rejected by Parliament because he wouldn't swear an oath? Was it 2 or 3 times? Something. I think
it was 2. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
2 or 3. I know that our council member Bob Forder, who's also our historian, has done a really good lecture series all about basically the history of British secularism. The lecture series is again on our website. He's done, I think, 2 or 3 episodes on Charles Bradlaugh and Annie Besant, who of course he worked very closely with.
Yep.
They are really good, and he goes into so much depth about Bradlaugh's life. And I know he does talk about this, about how many times he was elected and then couldn't take his seat.
Right, and this is Bob Forder.
Yeah, Bob Forder.
Okay, that's fine. We've noted that, and I'm sure our readers will note that too. Just coming back to the attitude, the public attitude to secularism, do you think there's been a change in public attitude or perception about atheism over the past 50 years or so? I mean, all right, 50 years or so may be a bit before your time, but do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, in terms of secularism,
yeah.
I think people still don't understand it. I think it's very poorly understood, the concept of secularism. It's just out of people's general, British people's consciousness, really. When I talk to people in America, they understand secularism. They completely understand what we mean by, sort of being, well, I'm not against religion. I'm just against religion having a disproportionate place in public life and interfering with affairs of the state. They all understand this one. There's lots of religious secularists, but in Britain, this is very poorly understood. And people assume that if you are against religious privilege, you're against religion, which you aren't necessarily. So, in terms of atheism, again, I'm not sure how much has moved on. Certainly, there are lots of people who say, well, I'm not really religious, but I'm not sure how many people say I'm an atheist. I think there's still a bit of hesitation to a lot of people saying I'm an atheist. Because I think the term atheist maybe is a bit more active. You actively disbelieve, you actively reject religion, whereas sort of non-religious, I think, feels softer. And whether that's more appealing to the British who avoid extremes most of the time at all costs and like to be in a sort of a bit of a fudge place, maybe that's the case.
Something about the word atheism that's kind of in your face. I can't put it easily into words.
It shouldn't be. I mean, I think it's a bit of a shame if you don't believe in a religion. There's nothing shameful about that. There's nothing, you shouldn't have to hide that fact. And I also meet people from sort of other religions in the UK, people from sort of minority religious backgrounds, and they are so careful about what they say in front of their family if they're not religious. They, it's sort of a secret, and I think that's such a shame.
I think it's in some sense it could be the way we're brought up to some extent. I remember I was in some place in the West Country. I was going through the town, and there was a guy issuing leaflets about Jesus loves you, and you should join the church and all the rest of it. And he offered me this leaflet, and I said, "Oh no, you're wasting your time with me. I'm an atheist." And he looked at me and said, "You're a what?" I said, "I'm an atheist." And he shouted at me in public, said, "Then you will burn in hell forever," And I thought, does he think I'm some sort of monster? I just happen to be someone who's not religious, effectively. But saying that you're not religious is a much softer way of saying it. So I do understand that.
Yeah, and it's a curious thing, isn't it? Yeah, people seem apologetic about it. They're like, "Oh, well, I'm afraid I'm not very religious," or people seem to think it's somehow a character flaw if they don't participate in a religion, which of course it isn't. It's a shame that people do feel that way still, and it's something that would be great if it did change, if people didn't feel that they had to be apologetic about holding a particular religion or belief.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, what do you think are the big challenges of the future for secularism in the UK? What are the great opportunities and what are the threats?
Well, what we've seen with Afghanistan, I think, makes it quite stark what the threats are. Obviously, this is all happening in Afghanistan, but it will have an impact on the UK. It will have an impact worldwide because this, it basically lends strength to Islamists. There are Islamists world over who are still trying to put pressure on the West to adopt some of their ideas. For example, you've got leaders of Islamic countries saying they want to see blasphemy laws in the West, possibly under the guise of sort of hate speech laws. So that really is a problem. It really, it really will have an impact on us. Looking more at home, I remember this question coming up before in another talk, and the speaker at the time said apathy is possibly the biggest threat. I think, I'm not sure so much about apathy, but certainly this lack of understanding that people have, this lack of, even me, and I was involved in interfaith, so quite, I was fairly literate in ideas about religion and didn't really know that there was a word for this idea of separating religion and state and sort of having a genuine equality between people of all religions and none. So, that's why education about secularism is so important, just to try and build awareness as to what this idea is and why it is so important for society, for democracy, and for everyone's human rights. So yes, that's definitely probably one of the big problems. But in terms of opportunity, I think British society is certainly placing more emphasis on these ideas of equality and diversity and inclusion, particularly of LGBT people and women and religious minorities. So this is good. This is an opportunity for us to say, well, secularism is a brilliant solution to this. Secularism is a really good means of creating this. In fact, without secularism, you can't achieve it really. So at least that's a good thing. That this is a big, this is a big topic. This idea of inclusion and equality.
I don't know if this thoughts crossed your mind, but it occurred to me that the fact that we've become a multi-ethnic, a multi-religious society, in a way, has actually aided us because it's kind of obliged the government to. The powers that be to widen their issue and widen their acceptance. And it's just a matter for humanists, hopefully, and secularists to just step inside that.
Yeah, totally agree, completely agree. And it used to be the case that, yes, religious minorities, there weren't that many groups of them. So, for example, Jews, with Jews, the solution was to kind of have different rules and different laws. For example, wedding laws. Like, okay, so all the Christians have this law and you can have this law. And that was the way of sort of creating a kind of equality. But that doesn't work when you have a multitude of different religions and beliefs. It just can't work. You cannot have different rules for everyone. That just doesn't, it's not feasible. And it eventually ends up creating a sense of unfairness. Because lots of these rules will be different. So the only way you can really do it in a place with so many different religions of belief and beliefs, create equality, is to have a secularist approach where you say, you know, religion is not going to be a part of our lawmaking. It's going to be an individual matter for you, and you are welcome to follow whatever religion or belief you want, as long as you don't impose it on anyone or threaten people's rights or harm people.
That seems to be going on in some parts of the country, though, doesn't it? I mean, I know that the NSS in particular has been involved with the establishment and development of faith to the faithless. And that's, you know, I suppose most people would think it's about Islam, but it's not. It's about several different faiths, about people being discriminated against or be having some social disadvantage because of because they've changed their religious views. I think it's very, very important that people should be free to make up their own mind and not be corralled along a particular path because of social pressures. So I think the work that Faith for the Faithless is doing is absolutely vital. And the National Secular Society and Humanist UK is part of that. So well done to you. That's a very, very important issue. People need to be free. And in fact, when we look at the world, and you mentioned Afghanistan, people are not free everywhere. And that freedom is precious. We need to protect it. Anyway, they're all the main questions I have to ask you. I don't know if you have any points that you would like to make or any questions that you'd like to ask us. But as far as I'm concerned, you know, thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been really interesting. It's been really great. And yeah, I've been listening to some of your other interviews as well. The Isle of Wight councillor, wasn't it, who recently succeeded in getting council prayers removed from the official business of council, wasn't it?
That's very interesting. Yes, you're right.
Yes, that was that. Yeah, we actually, but we've been in contact with him as well. So it was really nice to hear him speak about that.
Yes, he's actually in the next issue of Humanistically Speaking, where he's talking to the ex-mayor of Basingstoke, and you'll see it in this issue, because the ex-mayor of Basingstoke did exactly the same thing, and it caused a similar furore. And he said that the instant his mayoral duties ended, they immediately reinstated the prayers. Although how on earth you can justify that, I don't know. So long as people have the opportunity to pray in their own private space, that's fine. But impose it on everybody else, you know, it seems utterly wrong to me, and just embarrassing to the people who are not of the same faith.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic secularist issue, isn't it? The idea of imposing one particular religious view on people. You know, it might not seem like a harm, but it really does alienate people who don't share that religion, including other religious people.
Well, when you see next month's issue, seek that out and have a look at it. You'll find it very, very interesting, and it's quite amusing. And the thing that struck me was that both of the men didn't know each other, but they got on so well. They obviously had a very, very similar sort of outlook. It was really interesting. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thanks, you too.
Keep up with the postings on Facebook.
Will do.
And, no doubt I'll meet you one day. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks. I hope so.
Bye-bye.
Bye.